In today's video, I am going to reflect upon W. Quine's conclusion of the second dogma from his paper Two Dogmas of Empiricism. In our last two videos, we have covered two dogmas, two dogmatic principles of modern empiricism, and we just elaborated how Quine is rejecting the two dogmatic principles so as to establish his holism, meaning holism. He rejected the distinction between analytic and synthetic truths based on the argument that analyticity, we cannot really make sense of analyticity because it is ill-grounded. There is no necessary and sufficient criteria upon which the notion analyticity is based. So the distinction, the boundary between analyticity and synthetic can not be drawn. So the cleavage between analytic truth and synthetic truth is simply a metaphysical article of faith, an unempirical dogma of empiricism. So this is all about the first dogma. And about second dogma, Quine is mentioning that radical reductionism, their verifiability theory of meaning, this principle is simply a dogmatic assertion. A verifiability theory of meaning and truth assert that meaning of a statement lies in the method of empirical confirmation and disconfirmation, and each meaningful statement is meaningful synthetic statement definitely translatable or reducible to statements about sense data, and they emphasizes statements over word or term as a unit of a significant discourse. So indeed, radical reductionism or the verification theory of meaning is an improvement over Locke and Hume, because Locke and Hume, they emphasized term or word as a unit of a significant discourse, but here verification or radical reductionism, they emphasize statement as a unit of significant discourse. So this is some sort of improvement, but this is not adequate so far as Quine's standpoint is concerned. So he is proposing meaning holism instead of atomistic assumption. He is completely rejecting atomistic assumption. Atomistic assumption is what? That atomic statement or atomic propositions are significant unit of empirical discourse, and this has been propounded by the proponents of logical atomism like Russell and Wittgenstein. So Quine is stressing that synthetic meaningful statement are not at all reducible to statement about sense data. Why? Because our statement about external world face the sense experience not in isolation but only as a corporate body. To put it differently, our statements about external world faces the tribunal of sense experience as a whole. The entire conceptual schema faces the tribunal of sense experience, not in isolation. On the other hand, radical reductionism suggests that every statement, each meaningful synthetic statement taken in isolation from their fellow statements, they can be either they are verifiable, they are translatable to statements about sense data. So Quine is just rejecting the atomistic assumption of rejecting atomistic assumption. Yes, verification theory of meaning, they assert that taken in isolation, each meaningful synthetic statement can admit of confirmation or disconfirmation. So by refuting atomistic assumption, Quine established meaning holism. Now, coming to the crucial aspect of today's video is that Quine's conclusion. His conclusion after rejecting the second dogma. Number one is the two dogmas are at root identical. We understood that verification theory of meaning suggests that meaning of a statement lies in the method of empirical verification, empirical confirmation or disconfirmation. But analytic statements are the limiting cases which are confirmed no matter what. And at the same time, Quine passed over, or actually he ignored the question of meaning in the case during the discussion of analyticity. He ignored the question of meaning and he moved straight to the meaning, sameness of meaning or synonymy. In the discourse of first dogma, if you remember, he moved straight to synonymy, ignoring the question of meaning, and he moved straight to synonymy or sameness of meaning. And interestingly, the verification theory of meaning says that statements are synonymous if and only if they are alike in the point of method of empirical confirmation or disconfirmation. So the verification theory of meaning is the connecting thread between the first and the second dogma, because on the basis of verification theory of meaning, one can distinguish analytic and synthetic statements. How? Because analyticity simply boils down to the sameness of meaning or synonymity. We have already seen. Quine just pass over the question of meaning and jump straight to synonymity, because there is no realm of entities of meaning. That is why we are talking about synonymy. And the verification theory of meaning, amazingly, it is just connecting the two dogmatic principles, the way that two statements are synonymous if and only if they are alike in the point of method of empirical confirmation or disconfirmation. Given two statements, two synonymous statements, they are identical in the point of the method of empirical confirmation or disconfirmation. Now the next point is, in general, the truth of statements. In general, the truths of statements that does depend upon linguistic entity, yes. So in general, the truth of statements that does depend upon language and upon extra linguistic fact. Alright. However, it is nonsense to speak of a linguistic component and a factual component in the truth of any individual statement. Yeah, I'm going to break down it into simpler parts. He is talking about that truth of statement, definitely it is right. The truth of statements depend upon language on the one hand, and on the other hand depends upon extra linguistic fact. Alright, extra linguistic fact is the sensory. He is pointing to the sensory event, definitely. So truth of statements on the one hand depends upon language, and on the other hand depends upon extra linguistic fact. He is referring to sensory event, sensory input. Now, he is also asserting that it is nonsense to speak of a linguistic component and a factual component in the truth of any individual statement. And what is the purport of the last line? It is nonsense to speak of a linguistic component and a factual component in the truth of any individual statement. So it is nonsense to speak about the truth of an individual statement, because our statements about the external world, as he mentioned earlier, faces the tribunal of sense experience, not individually but only as a corporate body. So that is why it is nonsense to speak of a linguistic component and a factual component in the truth of a single or individual statement. So another important point is science, when taken collectively, depends upon, it has double dependence upon language and experience. Extralinguistic fact means experience. But this duality is not significantly traceable into the statements of science taken one by one. Actually, this point reiterates the preceding point. It's just saying that science taken collectively depends upon two things. One is linguistic component, another one is extralinguistic component, that is experience. So this duality, however, is not traceable to the statements of science one by one. That means he is just emphasizing the point that statements taken in isolation from its fellow statements cannot be verifiable or cannot be confirmed or disconfirmed by empirical method, because our statements of external world faces the tribunal of sense experience, not individually but only as a corporate body. So the entire conceptual schema, the entire linguistic framework, in the one hand we have the conceptual schema, and on the another hand we have the linguistic framework. So the conceptual schema corresponds linguistic framework, and when they are taken collectively as science as a significant discourse, it's an empirical discourse. So as a whole, the meaningfulness of a statement of statements depend on the entire conceptual scheme or the linguistic framework. But the statement, when taken in isolation from its fellow statements, so and that in that case it will be nonsense to speak of the truth, speak of a linguistic component and a factual component in the truth of individual statement. So it is simply put, it will be utterly nonsensical according to Quine to speak about the truth of an individual statement taken in isolation from its fellow statement, because we need to understand the meaning of a statement in relation to the entire conceptual schema or linguistic framework. That is what Quine is trying to convey. And the last conclusion is that even though taking statements rather than term as a unit of significant discourse is an improvement over Locke and Hume, it is not enough. The unit of empirical significance is the whole science. It is just again emphasizing, it is just reiterating the same point in different way. Is saying that definitely it was an improvement, that statements have been considered as a unit of significant discourse by the radical reductionists, but still it is inadequate, because for Quine, the whole of science is the unit of significant empirical discourse. So now I'm going to wrap up my discussion today. In the next video, I'm going to cover Quine's ontology and his non-translatability of meaning, these two important aspects of his linguistic philosophy.